I don't know if this is simply because English isn't my first language, or whether this is something my natively English-speaking viewers can relate with, but I actually never realized paralogue is not a real word. I always imagined it was some old-timey English word, and could have sworn I've seen it used in other contexts, before eventually finding out that no, Paralogue is a Fire Emblem original creation, like Manakete, the weapon triangle, and the name Barst. Anyway, today we're gonna be talking about the dark side of these side stories, a mechanic I've always really enjoyed for what it's worth, although they have definitely had a rocky history throughout the series to say the least. Also, just to clarify, I consider Gaiden chapters and paralogues to be the same thing with a different name. I know there's a contingent of the fanbase that doesn't, which I frankly don't really understand, so I figured I'd clear that up since I'll be using the terms interchangeably throughout this video. Okay, with formalities out of the way, let's take a look at some of the most insane paralogues we've ever seen, which can essentially be divided into two categories. First, the good old days, when Fire Emblem games were still sprite-based, and whatever the graphics in the DS remakes are supposed to be. After Gaiden chapters were introduced in Freyja, they mostly rose to prominence on the GBA, with Binding and Blazing Blade especially going all in on what was at the time a brand new mechanic. The games that followed afterwards, Sacred Stones and the Tellius games, had only one paralogue shared between the three of them. That one wasn't even optional. So what happened there? No, nothing special. Just some of the worst game design decisions Fire Emblem has ever seen. After a decent enough implementation in Freyja, things went completely off the rails in Binding Blade. To put it bluntly, how you were ever supposed to properly finish this game without a guide is beyond me. Let me paint you a picture of what we're dealing with here. Binding Blade has a total of 7 Gaiden chapters, all of which are unlocked after keeping certain characters alive up until that point, often in combination with a turn limit. At first, this starts out fairly doable. Keep Lilina alive? Sure, I can do that, she's quite a prominent character anyway. Same with Elfin, he's a character you're trying to keep out of harm's way anyway. But then, the difficulty ramps up. To unlock Chapter 14X, you need to beat one of the worst maps in Fire Emblem history in 20 turns, which sounds like a lot, but you have to keep in mind this is a desert map, meaning low mobility, and a Fog of War map, which usually suggests you take things slow. So all throughout Arcadia, the game is screaming at you, take it slow, take your time, while in the background an invisible clock is ticking and ticking. Oh, and did I mention you need to keep Sophia alive too, only one of the worst characters in the game? It's simply terrible game design, there's no other way to put it. But hey, at least it's only a paralogue, right? You can live without this optional content, surely? No. In order to unlock Binding Blade's true ending, which really is just a not bad ending, you need to complete every single paralogue in the game, including some others that come later down the line, which are not as bad to unlock as 14X, but not exactly easy either, like the ones that require you to beat some huge and difficult maps in 20 turns. Completing all these side stories rewards you with the legendary weapons of Alib, like Mullagir, Durandal and Armats. But no, don't you think about using them. In order to access the last few story chapters, all legendary weapons must still have uses left, which is obviously easy to do when you have your GBA in one hand and a guide in the other, but how the hell Japanese kids in 2002 were supposed to figure this out on their own, I have no clue. Surely you would want to give these cool legendary weapons a try once you have them, but instead the game actually punishes you for doing that and suggests you just try the whole thing over again. It's some of the worst game design I have ever seen, truly a product of its time, hoping to squeeze some extra hours of content out of a game that didn't even really need it in the first place. Had this all been optional content, it might just have been some of the most beloved content of the GBA era, but instead it has ended up as a prime reason why Binding Blade is among my least favorite games in the series. At least the chapters themselves are fun to play, I guess. Despite this train wreck of an implementation, Gaiden chapters returned for the sequel prequel, The Blazing Blade, upping the total of them to 9 even. Credit where credit is due, in general this game handles paralogues much better. They're optional now, and are really no more than a nice bonus reward for playing fast, exploring or meeting side objectives. Basically put, Blazing Blade returns the vast majority of the paralogues to the formula that worked for Freyja, and lo and behold, it works again. Notice the wording there though. The vast majority. What can I say? IS is gonna IS and just had to sneak in 2 paralogues exclusive to the Hector mode that are, to put it delicately, Pegasus dung. Now, what happens in these chapters and the extra story beats they unlock are everything but bad. It tells us a lot about the interesting backstory of Nergal, and while I would have preferred it if this information would be more widely available, I also like that this stuff is missable and serves as a reward for those who want to dive deeper into the game. But the requirement to unlock these 2 paralogues, I don't know who came up with this, but never let them cook again. First, Chapter 19X, Imprisoner of Magic, which is unlocked after beating Chapter 19, the Dread Isle, within 15 turns. That is on the steep end. Dread Isle is a fog of war map after all, but it's doable enough, even without a guide. But here's the kicker though. Imprisoner of Magic also has its own paralogue following after it, Chapter 19XX, A Glimpse in Time. This time around, you need to defeat the enemy known as Kishuna, who teleports away after 15 turns. This seems easy on the surface, another 15 turn count that doesn't even require you to beat the entire thing, but it's really a lot harder than it sounds, and I doubt you'll be able to pull it off without a guide that told you this was something you had to go for. But alright, I know my viewers are good tacticians, so you managed the best Kishuna and we're all ready for the next paralogue. Only for the story to continue with Chapter 20. Oh, we completely forgot to level up our Nils, all the way back in Lynn's story for Christ's sake. It still feels ridiculous to even say out loud, but yes, in order to unlock this paralogue, you need to wrap up Chapter 10, the final map of Lynn's campaign, with Niels being at least level 7. And mind you, that won't happen by coincidence. You have to purposefully stall and dance until it starts to resemble child labor before Niels will ever reach level 7, a solid 10 hours before it even matters. It's mind-bogglingly dumb, and probably the worst requirement for a paralogue in Fire Emblem history. And really, the fact that it's only a probably and not a certainly is insane in its own right, and something Hector can thank Marv and his Shadow Dragon on DS for. After that aforementioned absence in 3 back-to-back games, Gaiden chapters returned in the first ever Fire Emblem remake, which in concept was a good decision. Shadow Dragon is the most basic Fire Emblem experience in existence. It's enjoyable, sure, but also very basic, and extra paralogues to spice up the story and add some new, modern content could have worked out very well. Hell, it did work out very well for the next remake, New Mystery of the Emblem, which added an entirely new storyline through paralogues that added a ton to the experience. But Shadow Dragon was a swing and a miss. This game added 5 side chapters that weren't present in the original game, all rewarding you with a brand new character. That alone makes for a great incentive to want to play them and try them out, but it's painfully obvious IS had a different vision for these folks. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we as players simply like the idea of trying out new units and seeing what they bring to the table. But IS clearly meant for this sextet to serve more as compensation for players who struggle to keep their units alive. After all, in order to unlock their paralogues, your units have to die. Each requirement is the exact same. Your army must consist of less than 15 units by the time the original chapter ends, which essentially means you either have been screwing up by a nearly insane amount, especially for the paralogues later in the game, or you purposefully sent your army members to their death. Surely that can be the intention, but it is definitely the result of these bizarre requirements. You'd almost think IS was so scared of introducing casual mode here for those struggling to keep their units alive that they came up with this crazy roundabout way of fixing it, only to then realize they made things even worse and just bit the bullet for New Mystery of the Emblem. Anyway, we've been talking about paralogues for like 8 minutes now and haven't even discussed actually playing them all that much. And the reason for that is quite simple. Most of them are perfectly serviceable or flat out good to great maps, with the aforementioned New Mystery Paralogues as a perfect example. Those are some of my favorite chapters in the game, even if they're a tad easy compared to the base game. I have in the past, in my The Worst Chapter in Every Fire Emblem Game video, already talked about some paralogues I strongly dislike, like Blazing Blade's Night of Farewells and Free House's Foreign Land and Sky, both of which I consider to be, as you might guess, the worst chapters in their respective games. But I don't think I'd make anyone happy by repeating myself, so if you're interested in my problems with those chapters, I suggest you check out that video. I just figured I'd mention them since they're definitely among the worst of the worst. But when it comes to going into more detail today, I want to pick another paralogue to hone in on, being Father and Liege from Fates, which is the child recruitment chapter for Ryoma's son Shiro. Now, in essence, this chapter isn't absolutely god-awful, and I won't be ranting about it like I did earlier with, say, Binding or Blazing Blade, but the circumstances of this particular paralogue still make it one of the most ridiculous ones of the modern era. Since Shiro is Ryoma's son, this chapter is exclusive to Birthright and Revelation, with especially Birthright players being likely to play this map, seeing as Ryoma is basically the main lore of that version. However, as you probably know, Birthright was meant for newer players to dive into, and is probably the easiest Fire Emblem game in existence. And yet, this paralogue, which was Birthright exclusive the first month of Fate's release by the way, is conquest level hard. It's not unbearable, it's not impossible, but it is probably the biggest difficulty spike this series has ever seen. No matter at which point in the game you unlock this chapter, there is a big chance the story chapter you played before and will play after Father Unleash will be significantly easier than this. Now, it isn't beating the chapter necessarily that's hard, it's more the goal that made you want to play it in the first place, recruiting Shiro. You need to make your way to him through the sand, past these surprisingly strong enemies before it's too late, and that can be a lot quicker than you might expect. These enemies are much stronger than Shiro is, and the longer you wait before doing this chapter, the quicker they can take him out. In fact, if attempted on chapter 26, you won't even survive a single round of combat. So yeah, you better bring a rescue staff and a sturdy flyer, otherwise you're in for a bad time. And last but not least, I want to talk about paralogues in Engage. In my opinion, these are some of the best paralogues we've ever had, truly befitting of the game's celebratory theme, and with each and every one, I couldn't wait to see what was referenced and how the themes from the original games would be presented. Some were done better than others though, I think that's fair to say. Lucina's is amazing, for example, whereas Lynn's is good from a gameplay perspective, but I don't like that the map itself is from Binding Blade, even if the theme fits. But that isn't why I brought this topic up actually. Befitting of this video's theme, I want to talk about the ridiculous situation that is your own allied emblems killing your units to make sure they're a real test, I guess? I get that this was done to make sure these paralogues were actually challenging and they wouldn't just want to force classic players to switch to casual without their approval, but surely they could have figured out a better middle road than this. I mean, I cannot be the only one who initially thought your characters were allowed to die during these paralogues, only to have the rewind time where their death quote sounded a little too real for my liking. Frankly, in-universe it is unexplainable why this happens. It makes your emblems out to be some kind of extreme hardliners when that certainly isn't the intention. Except for Marv, obviously, he had no problem sending his friends to their deaths to unlock new paralogues. But yeah, for most of them you would think this would be a bridge too far. Maybe they could have done something like the emblems switch their dark form all of a sudden because of weird Sombra magic and have to be freed, which would have been random, sure, but hey, it still makes more sense than slaying your own army. How would you have fixed this strange little situation? And what are your thoughts on paralogues in general? Share it in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider giving it a like and subscribe to the channel to stay updated on all my future Fire Emblem content coming up. For now, thanks for watching and enjoy the rest of your day.